right now, at the time of this recording, there's a tremendous war going on in Israel and one in Ukraine. And I don't want to get to the politics of either of those situations, but I'm sure that your culture, the Lakota culture, and other indigenous cultures had a better way of solving disputes, or maybe peeling back the onion and getting to maybe the heart of problems differently. You want to talk to us about any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an argument, that I see come up a lot and in one of the most unfortunate spaces, which is that I think people like to often justify the genocide of Native American people by stating that, well, your cultures were warlike and were this way and that way, and you fought, right? You guys are known. We picture you with the bow and arrow and a spear, so you must be like X, Y, and Z projection from our culture when it comes to violence. But when we look at the archaeological records in North America, we actually don't find anywhere near the same evidence for mass violence that we do in Europe, right? So if you were to go like dig up a battlefield somewhere in like France or England or something, there'd be places where you could go to, right? Some spot from the 100 Year War, which was actually like 300 years long, but where you would find mass graves, battlefields, hundreds of, artifacts that, at this point have probably been unearthed, but that someone unearthed at some point that shows that hundreds of people from either side, from either culture, had died in a place. And we don't find that anywhere in North America. We don't find archaeological records of war. We find the archaeological record of battle, of people fighting three, four, 10 versus 20, but not hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people just lining up to kill one another, like we find in the other hemispheres. And I think a large part of this is that we have in our oral tradition record of the fact that culturally it was more valuable to spare an enemy but make them admit defeat than it was to actually kill them. And that's because for us a lot of our disputes were territory disputes and were resource disputes. And so if you wanted a hunting ground, it was better off to send someone back to say we can't hunt there anymore because the Lakota are here. They're there, they'll chase us off. That's their hunting ground now. So not fighting to the death actually served the purpose of you gained the respect and the honor of your enemies as opposed to just their vitriol. And so I think when we look at the conflicts that we have now today, either the conflict in Israel or the conflict in Ukraine, I think the commonality that we see is there's a resource factor to either of these, right? There's a territory factor to either of these. And a lot of the fuel for the fire of the territory dispute comes from foreign colonial entities, right? We exist in this time where war happens for profit and happens over resources. I think examining the colonial roots of a conflict on either side and saying, okay, like who benefits off of the stock market, the resource decisions being made here. I think that's really a lot of what needs to be looked at on either side. The speculation of what resources or property is worth in my moral compass isn't worth taking away the lives of hundreds or thousands of
Mhm.
people.
Well, I love so many of the words you chose in that, because we know at least one of those wars is just a huge political turmoil that just goes deeper and deeper and farther and farther back in human history. And I guess you could say that about Ukraine as well, because I mean most of the territories on the planet right now were carved up by the mechanism that you just described in the end, right? Like, so rather than get into a debate about how far back we go to say who owns what, is there a Lakota or an indigenous way of looking at this problem of ownership of land? Like, the indigenous people don't think of ownership of land as something you can own, right?
No, not really. Like I think we wouldn't have a word for it in our language, and it's a hard concept to wrap the indigenous mind around. But I think that really the closer way that we see it is belonging to the land itself. And the joke that I often use as someone whose worldview centers the earth itself as a singular organism is we're kind of would see that like two fleas arguing over who owns the dog. Right? Like, if your lifespan is that much shorter than the thing, the organism who houses you, right? I don't think you really have much grounds to debate on who owns it. And so I think from there on out, I think the struggle should really be in the organizing of community. So I think in all cases, community is usually the answer to colonization.